Hello and welcome back. It's 2 p.m. local time and you're watching the Midday Report. I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Poland's lower house of parliament is set to hold a vote of confidence for Prime Minister Donald Tusk's government next week. The announcement was made by the Speaker of the Chamber, Szymon Hołownia.
In a televised address on Monday, Tusk announced he would ask for the vote of confidence in his government following the defeat of his party's candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski, in Sunday's presidential runoff. Trzaskowski lost to Law and Justice's Karol Nawrocki by fewer than 2 percentage points. If Tusk's government fails to win the vote of confidence, the prime minister will have to step down. Then, the task of nominating a new head of the Polish government will fall to the outgoing president, Andrzej Duda. The candidate he puts forward will have to gather enough support in parliament to be sworn in. If the parliament fails to agree on a new prime minister, early parliamentary elections will be inevitable.
The Dutch government has collapsed after Geert Wilders' far-right Party for Freedom left the ruling coalition. His coalition partners reacted with anger, with the leader of the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy saying Wilders chose his own interest over right-wing policies. Geert Wilders announced the decision on social media after a meeting of leaders of the four parties making up the Dutch ruling coalition. On May 26th, Wilders said that he will leave the government if his demands regarding migration are not met. His far-right Party for Freedom won the 2023 election and secured 37 seats in the Dutch parliament. The party held a key role in the coalition and insisted on adding 10 new measures to the coalition agreement. Among them were closed borders for asylum seekers, increased military border controls, fewer asylum centers, and the deportation of Syrian refugees holding temporary residence permits.
We proposed a plan to close the borders to asylum seekers by stopping them, sending them away, and closing asylum centers instead of building more. A stricter policy to ensure that the Netherlands does not become one big asylum center. We presented a plan for that, and a number of you were there. I asked the coalition partners for their support for that. Former coalition partners, I should say, at least for the majority of those measures. They didn't come out in support of it. Instead, they said, just submit the plan, or maybe we can submit a motion to investigate it, or just ask your minister to do something. Of course, there's no guarantee that something will make it through the Cabinet of Ministers or the House of Representatives. So I could do nothing else now than to say that we withdraw our support for this cabinet. I've also just informed the Prime Minister that I withdraw the Party of Freedom's ministers from the cabinet and that we can no longer bear responsibility for this.
A powerful overnight earthquake has shaken parts of western Turkey and the nearby Greek islands, leaving dozens injured and a teenager dead.
Just as families begin their summer vacation season, the resort town of Marmaris in Turkey and the Greek island of Rhodes were struck by a 6.2 magnitude earthquake, causing panic among visitors. At least 69 people were injured while fleeing their hotel rooms in fear, and a 14-year-old girl died in hospital in Fethiye, Turkey, after suffering a panic attack. Greek seismologists say that the epicenter of the quake, located 68 kilometers deep, minimized surface damage but amplified the quake's reach, which is why it was felt all the way out in Rhodes. The depth of the quake, however, also means there's little risk of strong aftershocks or a tsunami. So authorities and travel agencies in both Turkey and Greece are urging visitors to stay calm and follow local guidance.
Russian forces launched a deadly attack on Ukraine's Sumy on Tuesday, just a day after peace talks in Istanbul failed to make significant progress.
The attack, carried out using multiple launch rocket systems, killed at least 2 people and wounded around 20 others, including a 17-year-old. The strike caused widespread damage, setting 2 cars ablaze and damaging residential buildings and a medical facility. Authorities reported that many of the wounded were in critical condition. This strike follows renewed hostilities in the Sumy region, an area repeatedly targeted since Russia's invasion in 2022. The attack occurred after the second round of Russia-Ukraine talks in Istanbul, where no significant breakthroughs were made.
The head of Ukraine's presidential office is heading to Washington, D.C. in the wake of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul. Our correspondent Alex Kadier is in Istanbul and has more.
Well, the big question here in Istanbul over the last couple of days was simply how can peace be achieved? We saw the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine grinding basically to a halt. There was an important agreement on a prisoner swap, but those prisoner swaps had been agreed in the past by Russia and Ukraine without meeting for talks in Istanbul. And when it comes to moving towards peace, towards a peace process, it seems very little progress has been made through diplomatic channels by having these meetings here in Istanbul. So the question for the Ukrainian side is how can they convince the United States to put more pressure on Russia? We have seen Donald Trump, the US president, reluctant to put more pressure on the Russian Federation, more pressure on Vladimir Putin. So Andrei Yermak, the head of the presidential office of Ukraine in Washington, will want to convince the American administration to put more pressure, both by giving support to Ukraine, military aid, equipment, weapons, everything Ukraine needs to continue the fight, but also sanctions on Russia to slow down the economy of Russia and the Kremlin's ability to wage war in Ukraine. One member of that delegation, of course, the economy minister of Ukraine, crucial figure to that minerals deal with the United States. So Ukraine eager to show the US, we will work with you on the economy, we will work with you on minerals, but we need you to work with us, Ukraine, on putting more pressure on Russia. That, at least from a Ukrainian perspective, is the only way. We have seen Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, saying in the last few hours, the talks in Istanbul are only for Russian victory. They are not for peace in Ukraine, showing that at least in some upper echelons of Russian leadership, there is no desire to make a peace deal in these talks. So the only solution, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, is more sanctions on Russia and more military support for Ukraine. In Istanbul, I'm Alex Kadye for TVP World.
Residents of the Russian-occupied Ukrainian regions of Zaporizhia and Kherson are currently living without electricity after Ukrainian airstrikes hit the power grid. Russian news agencies are reporting that the blackout has not affected operations at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. According to the Russian-backed governor of Zaporizhia, Yevgeny Balitsky, the entire region is without power after a series of Ukrainian airstrikes. Meanwhile, the Russian head of the Kherson region has said that some 100,000 residents of 150 towns and villages are without power. Russian authorities claim that the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is currently offline and radiation levels remain stable and safe. Ukrainian Member of Parliament Kira Rudik has defended Ukraine's recent strikes on Russian strategic airfields, saying that they were justified and did not hinder the ongoing peace negotiations in Istanbul. During an interview with TVP World, Rudik emphasized that Russia continues to launch relentless attacks on Ukrainian territory, underscoring the need for a strong defensive response.
Russia wouldn't be happy about 30% of their fighter bombers being destroyed. However, it's not that situation beforehand was very different and that we have stopped something significant. No, exactly during these talks, there was a massive attack on Kyiv last week. I think, Sasha, it was the most audacious attack on Kyiv for really a while. So they have attacked peaceful cities, they have killed people, and we are attacking their military objects. And I think this operation will go down in history. And there is not a person in the world who may say that we were not in our right of doing so, and that would say something negative about that. Because really, even if you don't like Ukraine, even if you think that we should have done something different, you need to acknowledge that now Russia has got less flights and less planes and less ability to attack not only Ukraine but any other country. So I think quietly or loudly, everyone is happy about it.
The United Kingdom launched a plan to boost defense spending amid increased Russian threats to European security. According to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, this is the largest sustained hike in defense spending since the end of the Cold War. While announcing his government's strategic defense review, Starmer went on to say that Europe faces war, nuclear risks, cyber attacks, and Russian aggression on sea and in the air. The plan sees an increase in weapons spending by £1.5 billion and a £15 billion investment into the British nuclear warhead program. Apart from increases in military spending, the review recommends the introduction of new equipment and systems, including jets capable of launching tactical nuclear weapons. Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, has backed further sanctions against Russia. His comments come as the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025 is under consideration by the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. On Monday, Johnson told reporters that many Congress members want to sanction Russia as strongly as possible, and he is an advocate for that. The bill, written by Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, involves a 500% tariff on any country purchasing Russian energy products. According to Graham, the new measures would put Russia on a, quote, trade island. Graham also added that consequences of Vladimir Putin's barbaric invasion must be made real to countries that prop it up, like China and India. The U.S. Senate is expected to start processing the bill by the end of the week.
On this vote, the yeas are 215, the nays are 200.
The United States is simply not going to be able to do as much in the Pacific and the Indo-Pacific or in any other parts of the world if it decides to go alone. It needs the Transatlantic Alliance, said Aaron Koreva, director of the Warsaw office of the Atlantic Council, when talking to TVP World. Koreva discussed how U.S. President Donald Trump's approach to Europe has been contradictory and emphasized the importance of the U.S. maintaining strong transatlantic ties, especially as it shifts its focus to China and the Indo-Pacific.
As so many other things with Donald Trump, there's one thing what's being said in front of the cameras, and then there's another thing of what is actually being done. Donald Trump has made some strange statements about the European Union, such that it was founded in order to screw America over or something like that, which is completely not true. But if you look at what the Trump administration so far has actually been doing, most of the people that they've been talking to are European leaders. So it's not, they have established working relations with several leaders in Europe from various different backgrounds. I'm thinking of Giorgia Meloni, but I'm also thinking of the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the Finnish President Alexander Stubb was playing golf with him. To a certain extent, Macron, and of course in Poland, President Andrzej Duda established a very good connection to Donald Trump, and the new president of Poland, Karol Nawrocki, has already visited Trump once. So we have, there's potential over there. The important matter for the United States to realize is that if the United States wants to say focus on China, that's understandable, but the United States is simply not going to be able to do as much in the Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific, or in any other parts of the world if it decides to go alone. It needs the Transatlantic Alliance.
A Latvian court has sentenced 4 foreign nationals to prison terms ranging from 2 to 4 years for their involvement in the illegal transportation of migrants. The court found that the traffickers used a vehicle disguised as a police van, complete with flashing lights and counterfeit number plates, to smuggle people across the border. In one instance, the authorities stopped a minibus with fake state border guard markings in northeastern Latvia and discovered that it was illegally transporting 25 migrants. This incident followed the apprehension of numerous migrants from Belarus along with their traffickers on October 8th after a prolonged chase. Alongside the sentences, the court ordered the 4 individuals to be deported upon serving out their prison terms. The OECD today announced an expected downturn in the global economy. Economic output is expected to fall and inflation to rise as bilateral U.S. tariffs are implemented and consumer confidence weakens. Today, OECD Secretary General Matthias Cormann in Paris announced the concerning conclusions of the OECD report, with a majority of countries adjusting economic expectations downwards. In the report, global growth is expected to slow to 2.9% from an earlier projection of 3.3%. The U.S. is expected to be hit especially hard as output expectations weaken to a mere 1.1% with bilateral tariffs in North America and China, a large part of the equation. The OECD has raised inflation expectations worldwide from 3.7% to 4.2% due to slowing investment amid an environment of weakening consumer confidence. However, the report is not all doom and gloom. In the Visegrad blog, projections are still up. Poland's GDP is expected to increase from a projected 2.9% to 3.3%. The Czech Republic is up from 1% to 1.9%, and Hungary from 0.5% to 0.9%, with inflation in all 3 countries holding steady. And so this concludes our news breakdown here on TVP World, but please do stay tuned. You were just watching the Midday Report, and we hope to see you soon here on TVP World.